Do you like conversation on a variety of topics? Feel like no one wants to talk about the things that interest you? Tired of only hearing the same political, sports, or catastrophe talk? Yeah, we feel that way too. Join two high-functioning geeks as they discuss just about anything under the sun. We can't tell you what we'll be talking about each week because we don't know where our brains will take us. It will be an interesting conversation though, so hang on and join us. Here comes the Relentless Geekery.
Who knows where you pick those things up? They're little affectations from reading or something like that, but
every now and then I'll be writing and I'll write something and then someone will read it, editor will look at it, whatever, and they'll say, well, you need to write more like you would talk. I said, I am. That is how I talk.
Exactly. I actually had people say there's Al-speak. It isn't only the odd things I've picked up from literature. It's that I'm always doing neologisms. I always come up with odd words or odd phrases because this should exist, and not even purposefully. Not like, hey, I'm trying to come up with sniglets, which is its own kind of thing, a phenomenon from 30 years ago. Yeah. But just I don't know. The English language is rich, and it's this wonderful Swiss Army knife of languages where it adopts from everywhere else. And for how it sounds. I remember I was laughing. Well, actually, I think I talked about this online, but not here. I think that it's hilarious to say as a cry of like celebration, Bundinya.
Yeah, right. I saw that.
And so apparently it really means like Calipigian in Portuguese. And it's really not Bundinya, it's Budonia, if I remember right. And so I've not embarrassed myself yet where I said it. Usually it's just between Colleen and I or something like that. And, one day I'm going to be at the Portuguese soccer match and I'm going to be like, why does that guy keep commenting on other people's butts? And yet it just has the right mouthfeel. You know what I mean? It like rolls out, woohoo, Bundinya. So
there's a podcast I listen to called Grammar Girl, and she explores topics in words and conversation and grammar and all sorts of stuff. Sure. And I remember this one family, she always asks, what are the words? What are the things your family says that nobody else does?
Oh, yeah.
And that's love it. And this one lady wrote in and said that their daughter said, hey, what did we do lasterday instead of yesterday? And they're like, well, that makes a whole lot of sense. So now that's what they say, lasterday or laster year. And I'm like, exactly. I like that.
Our family has that. We like some things, and maybe it is oftentimes from kids. At one point, my niece said they were going to be going to Kalamazoo instead of Kalamazoo. And it's as if Kalamazoo makes any kind of sense where it's like, that's the way it should be pronounced. Right. You know what I mean? So Kalamazoo now is just one of those things that every time that we say it, and if anybody overhears us, they're happy to correct it. It's like, no, we know. And in fact, that's a common thing. I am very playful about that kind of thing. And people are always there are certain people, as you know, that like you can't dangle a mistake in front of them without them pouncing on it.
Oh, yeah.
And so sometimes I will do that voluntarily. I want to give them a little grist for the mill, whether it's speaking or in writing. You'll throw something that it's not going to outrage them, but it sure will attract their attention.
And I know there are lots, in Mensa, there's a lot of grammar Nazis, there are a lot of rules Nazis, everything.
Exactly.
Which is part of what we talked about before, that black and white mindset. It's either right or wrong. There's no gray. But
exactly.
I was reading something about the grammar and how a lot of the things people say, well, that's wrong. Well, they're wrong for saying it's wrong because it's really correct. And part of that is because the grammar rules change over time based on common usage. And we talked about that a bit. So I've been like, because there are times people will correct something, but it's like, no, or they're correcting it because it's the Chicago style, but it's not grammar, and grammar is separate from style. We talked about that too.
Exactly. So that it can be a little bit too stilted, you know what I mean? Like you're like, well, that's proper, but that's not how people really talk, Right. And in fact, I remember, I was learning German all through high school. My mom and dad both speak German, and so it used to be the secret language they would use around birthdays. But as I'm learning German, I was finding out that when I'm talking to German speakers, it sounded like I was from South Africa to English people, where you talk very precisely and do not have any contractions or drop endings. And that unless you learn how to slur and use patois and use little swearing or whatever else it might be, you don't sound like a native speaker. You sound like a school, taught speaker. So that's part of it too, is you kind of have to corrupted a little bit to sound like not you're lazy. It's just that that's how people talk. They're
Yeah.
efficient in how they talk. They're playful in how they talk. That kind of
And
thing.
all the
So,
people that still correct the, well, ain't it isn't in the dictionary. Well, actually, it is.
oh boy, yes,
Ain't
yeah,
is a word now, and it is accepted.
yeah.
And I think axe is worse than ain't. So
Right. Yeah, actually, Colleen and I have discussions about this because she is more of a purist than I. And so I am willing to accept that language has changed over time. But what I kind of hate is where it really is wrong. And we just come to accept it, I think, out of laziness. And so you must
right.
have read about, now literally is not that it really is the truth and exactly it. Literally now is the same as figuratively
Yes.
because they think that literal, it really means like as if it's in a cartoon, I guess. And like, wow, it would have been okay if you learned the correct way instead of using the wrong way so badly that now it's just acceptable as a
It
substitute.
it's
And
the
yet
same as
people,
in
oh,
school.
no,
It's the same as in school. Well,
yeah,
we don't have enough people getting A's. So instead of getting 9 or 10 out of 10, you only have to get 7 out of 10 to have an A. I mean, we'll
right.
just
Or to
change it
read,
to accommodate the people that don't want to try harder. That's a
yes,
whole issue, man.
renorming the test, I think is, that
Yes.
kind
Yes.
of,
So okay, switch topics because I'll
sure,
forget
sure.
about this if I don't. And I want like 2 weeks now. Okay, so the Friends reunion is on HBO, and it's
Right.
a big deal. I know Gina's excited about it, though she hasn't watched it. Huge TV show, and people still love it. You know, and I saw one of the little clips of the interviews, and it got me thinking. Imagine that. And the guy, it was a writer or producer, and they kind of asked him, "What is the endearing and enduring just success of this show that everybody loves it and they get sucked into it?" He's like, "Well, I
Yeah.
think what it is, the best comedies on TV, the half-hour comedies, are always you take normal characters." And you make the comedy and the jokes based on them, that they have these divergent personalities that play against each other, and you can get them in the situations, and it creates its own comedy. And I was
Got
like,
it.
that's pretty intense, because when you think about it, I was like, okay, what do we got? We've got Cheers, kind of the same thing. They were always in the
Okay.
stupid bar, but it was,
Right.
what's Woody going to say? What's Norm going to say before he gets another drink? You know what? It's always that.
Okay.
And you go back even to Archie Bunker. I can't tell you an exact episode of Archie Bunker, but I could tell you what Archie's character is like. And and
Exactly.
Edith and her, oh, Archie and Meathead and, all that. So
Hmm, hmm.
these are shows that still people talk about and know, and they've lasted. And I was like, that makes sense to me saying that about Friends. It's probably going to be around for 20, 30 more years.
Right.
And then I went, oh, click. That's what Big Bang Theory was.
Exactly. Very distinctive characters, each with their own
Yes.
quirks, and how they rub
Yes.
up against each other is part of the
Yes.
comedy.
It
Exactly. A
was
big part
very
of the
much.
comedy.
And I
Yeah.
know a lot of the people we've talked to hate Big Bang. Oh, they make fun of Sheldon. They do this. And I'm like, but that was the comedy. They took it to the extreme, and they weren't making fun of people with autism. They weren't making fun of
Sure.
people with any disability or anything. They were making fun of Sheldon. And around here, I know if someone came in, there are times when we are picking on Adam, and we know it's because of his autism, and he knows he has autism, and we're picking on him, but it's a family thing, and we're laughing. We're not being mean to him and stuff. We're laughing as a family. The same
Right.
as they pick on me with my little foibles and forgetfulness. I mean, they're talking about getting this huge chain to put on my wallet and my phone so I don't lose them.
So they
And
don't
it's,
keep straying.
yes,
Yeah.
it's the nutty professor always forgetting stuff. But that's
Yeah.
that's what I realized Big Bang Theory is, and it's probably why so many Mensons get upset about it, because, well, they're making fun of me because I do that or I'm like that, and it's, yes, everybody can be made fun of. Oh my God, you could do a comedy show with nurses and that, because my wife and my mother both are in the nursing field, and some of the stories we hear, you laugh your butt off. And
Right.
it's these people are big characters. So I think
Yeah.
that is, if you look at Big Bang in that same way, I think it changes your mindset on it. And sometimes people that may not have appreciated it understand it. But that's also why everybody else got it and loved it so much.
Right. It's, I'm sure there's always been characterizations, and how much they border on stereotypes is kind of where you start to get, is that mean or not? Is that,
Right.
kind of overdoing it? And I guess, I don't know, I admire that ability to capture a character so well and have them be rich, that there's not just, well, that's the paper cutout character that's like, they're meant to be the gruff cop and that's all you get out of them, instead of finding out, no, they actually also like raise passenger pigeons up on their roof or something like that. And so I like that kind of quirkiness. I don't, well, I really don't like it when those things are used for like insult humor. You know what I mean? I know
Yeah.
that's part of it too. Like you said, when me and the boys used to get together to play poker, part of the whole thing of it was not what's going to happen with the money. It was all the teasing. It was all
Yes.
the, and and so I guess my first impression, whatever first episodes I must have seen of Big Bang Theory, like we talked about this a little bit before, I thought that they were mean. I thought that they were kind of like, well, they're just making fun of instead of fun with, and
Right.
that turned me off to it. But now now that I've got a bunch under my belt, there really is much more affection of and playing with, instead of just being, let's pin the tail on the donkey again and again and again.
Right. And,
Of
and
so
there's probably a lot of people that have had that friend like Sheldon, the one that's hard to deal with, but
absolutely.
he's still your friend, and you would still protect them, and you're part of the gang. And there's one thing that if they were just being mean and making fun of that guy in the hallway, that's the autistic guy, and always
Right.
making fun of him. Him and Wolowitz, he is as much upset with Wolowitz as Wolowitz gets with him, but they still jump on the plane and fly to Texas to help Sheldon or something.
That kind of thing.
It's
Exactly.
still there down deep down. They all go to the weddings. They all cheer for this, that, the other thing.
Yeah.
Again,
Yeah.
maybe it's my mindset seeing it different. I can definitely see myself, and my wife, oh my God, she'll watch episodes and she'll go, okay, in this episode you were Raj, or in this one you were Sheldon. She's like, I see. She's like, or we'll go to Mensa RG or something, and she'll go, hey, look, there's a guy over there being Wolowitz. I
See,
mean,
and I'm sure that that's part of what it is. Like, whenever you get insights into other cultures, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, who have I hung out with most of my life? Kind of the smarter kids in grade school and high school. College, I expanded, but there were still, like, when you get with the hard drinking crowd, there's stereotypes of those guys that they go out every kind of like
right.
Wednesday through Saturday night. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then you learn, well, this is the guy that can't stop talking about cars. This is the guy that's always like, hey, I'm on the prowl for women. And there's I don't know, base characteristics of people that when you find that out, that's kind of what you can tease them about, is because it's so apparent in them that you can, like, well, you don't have to go that far to take it to the point of absurdity, because they're kind of on the edge of it. You know what I mean? They're a little obsessed. And so I guess I really do. You're right. Many successful shows, especially with ensemble casts, that's exactly what they do, is they have enough going on amongst the characters. They're not all nurses that are all the same. When you watch Scrubs, there's absolutely different kinds of people going on there, and how they interact with each other, how they conflict with each other. That's a much a basis for the humor. I agree. That's really a good insight. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was just an interesting, but
Yeah.
regardless of who likes what, I'm trying to get into Friends. My wife really loves Friends. I've watched
Okay.
most of the first season, and it's not pulling me into the, oh my God, I got to watch more type thing. It's enjoyable so far, but I'm going to keep watching.
Yeah. See, Colleen and I that's one of those shows where we said, hey, Friends is now available. Oh boy, like 350 episodes. And just like you, we gave like the first season a try, and it's funny, but it's not must see funny, whatever sweet spot for humor for us, or maybe that's it. I never hung out in bars. I don't
Right,
have some part of watching it is not only getting insight into certain characters, it's that they're familiar with you because, hey, that's really like my brother. That's like my college roommate, whatever else it
right,
might be. And if it's not, it's like, wow, I kind of don't, whatever fish are in this fish bowl, I'm going to go out of the next tank. These guys just don't interest me enough. This gal is not, I don't know. There are certain things when we started watching 30 Rock, immediately wanted to see more because there were enough quirky characters, enough people I recognized, maybe enough people that I really saw me in them, that then it's of interest to you. Whereas that hanging around the bar, just that the premise, the entire premise, not even the characters themselves, but why are they there?
Right.
I just
Well,
don't do bar speak. I don't care about, you know
but
what I mean?
that's, why they do all these shows that are different. It's a lot
Hmm.
like video games. I will look at a video game like the Assassin's Creed that the kids play, and
Okay.
they look kind of cool, but then I go to play it and it's like these 20 key combinations on the controller. I'm like, give me a keyboard and a mouse, and I just can't get into it. But the theme of the assassin and the Templars is cool, but not.
Right.
I'm like, but you give me like the exact same game skinned into some medieval world with dragons and stuff, and I would probably play it longer, even if the mechanics are identical.
Okay.
It's that theme I enjoy. It's the same as books or anything else, board
Yeah,
games.
exactly.
So
I know there's games that I have done where at first I got onto them and it's like, okay, this is different than how I played before. The keyboard combination is different, whatever. But what I always count on is if I play this enough, you get finger memory. Your mind acclimates itself to whatever you're doing.
right,
And when you start doing it, that you're not thinking about that anymore, but you're just playing and interacting and it becomes more immersive. That's kind of a breakthrough point as to now if I'm really into the game, that's part of why is because I really am in the world and I'm not.
right,
I want to, I don't know, jump off this tower and grab something on the way down. But if I don't remember the key press, I'm just going to die. You know
right,
what I mean? So,
right.
okay.
So speaking of games, let's
Hmm.
topics, which we hardly ever do. Um,
You mentioned the tabletop simulator.
yes, I'm
Okay.
surprised you haven't looked at this a little more. Which I've looked at it, but it's been like, eh. And I
I
have,
just I just don't know nothing about there's so many things to learn about that once in a while, and maybe some part of it is I still had enough gaming with Colleen or with my family
yeah,
or whatever else it might be, even during COVID. And I know this is an odd thing. I really like interactive face to face, get the
yeah,
laughter,
I
gaming.
agree,
And
absolutely.
when I've been at like RGs and we were playing cards, somehow the stutteriness of it, of having to wait for the slowest person in the group is the one that slows things down if they're not really paying attention, or you can't quip if it's not people are reading the chat and they're not getting it in real time. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? So
yeah,
there's a lot of frustration that goes with the simulation is not good. It's not enough at all like real life that I was like, oh, I don't love this game so much that I'm going to
right,
take a step back, 3 steps back from how
right.
it could be.
Well,
But anyway, you've had some success with it. You've had some fun
yeah.
times now. Okay.
Well, I know several of the RGs that have done virtual. They
Hmm.
do the games through Tabletop Simulator. So
Right.
I had heard of it, but when I started seeing other people at the RGs using it, I'm like, oh, well, maybe there's something there, but I didn't. Well, anyway, Megan's friend came over and was showing her, and this cracked me up. He was showing her Warhammer 40K miniatures game.
Sure.
That is
Exactly.
totally not her type of game at all. But hey, she was willing to do it. Now, that's a whole
Okay.
nother discussion. But so I, I went and looked.
I want to like what you like because I like you. You
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah.
that.
So
Okay.
I went to Tabletop Simulator, and they have a lot of official games. So they look good, they play good, like Catan and Carcassonne and
Sure.
several others like that. So it's like, okay, I could I could see playing this if I can't get together with people. Like
Right.
my cousins down in Dayton, Dan and his family. I may not see them
Sure.
very much, but if they're up for a game of Dominion, we could jump on an evening. So I'm like, okay, that's of interest.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, this, like a lot of things, is a framework, and it allows modification on your own. So you name a game, and somebody probably has a mod for it to play. And
Okay.
that's how they are doing Warhammer 40K. Now, I know that gets into a gray area because Warhammer is still available. You can go to the store and buy it. You can get the
Right. It is a
miniatures.
copyrighted, trademarked property.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay.
I'm not probably caring to get into Warhammer, but I mean, these are kids just out of school, just starting a job. They can't afford to buy packs of $20 miniatures,
Exactly.
enough to
And
play. I mean,
right. Right.
seriously. So I get that. I'm not disparaging that. But cooler is some old games that are out of print that you can play on it.
And they've been revived, and instead of just fading
Yes.
into history, they still have a life. See, that
Yeah.
is a cool thing.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
Heroescape. I don't know if you ever played that one.
I did not. No.
For for
All
for
right.
yeah, for a miniatures game, Heroescape was way cool. So imagine warriors from several different universes and worlds and times all coming together to do battle. Okay.
Got it.
So there were
So you have to find
revolution.
out whether it's like magic versus science or
Yes.
anyway. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
okay.
So there were
Okay.
Revolutionary War figures. There were World War II paratroopers and a
Yeah.
few things like that. But then they also had the fantasy. They had giants. They had dragons. They had
Okay.
werewolves. They had made up characters just for this, fantasy
Right.
type. So it was a big mixture. They had spies. They had all sorts of stuff with different
Yeah.
abilities. So
Yeah.
they had different abilities on each thing. You could do groups or individual. But the two things I loved about it the most was they had tiles, hex tiles. So you built a map. It was a 3D map that you would build. And
Okay.
and the rules were beginner enough that just about anybody could pick it up easily. So we would lay out beautiful maps on the table and go. But the other cool thing, one of the mechanics they had was you'd have your group of 6, 7 different characters,
The
and
party. Exactly.
you would have 4 numbered little tokens, 1, 2, 3, and then a blank. So
Okay.
at the beginning of any round or any turn, you would put these on 4 of your cards. So the other players could see, okay, those 4 are going to be used this turn. One of them is a fake, is a bluff. Which one is
Okay.
going first? Which one's going last? So it was a neat
Interesting.
mechanic. So then I would go and my number 1 would move, and then your number 1 would move, and then Colin's
Right.
number 1 would move, and then my number 2 would go. But in the meantime, the map has changed by the time I get to 2 and 3. So it could
Okay.
be my strategy goes out the window, or he thought I was going to move my number 3 first, and he went in and killed them all, and they never even got to go.
Got
So
it.
it was a cool mechanic for that. And but that is on Tabletop
See, that's
Simulator.
okay. So that's that would be amazingly chaotic, and you would have to have enough people who want to play with. Wow, that things the rug can get pulled out from under you again and again. That's there's always the fog of war. There's always like no matter what plans you make, someone rolls initiative and like you said, cuts down your
Yeah.
guys before they even get a chance to get their attacks off or whatever. So that would be frustrating, but it would also be just like, wow, I really don't like necessarily games where you make the perfect plan. It's a matter of just playing it out. I
Yeah.
like where there's chaos and there's a little bit that the chance is an element, and sometimes big chance of changing things. You know what I mean?
Right.
So very interesting. Okay.
And I thought it was well balanced because, you would think, oh, a
Mhm.
dragon or a giant, and I've got little paratroopers. But the
Right.
paratroopers had other special abilities. They could move. The giants couldn't go on certain terrain because of how big they were, type thing. So
Exactly.
it
A
was
giant in a swamp is not. Yeah. Okay.
right. So
Okay.
they did have rules to help try and balance it. They did do a Marvel set, and it had Captain America and the Hulk and a few others, so you
Got
can
it.
mix that in.
That's where I think I've seen references to it, where it wasn't the mixture of everything, that they had created dedicated sets of things, and then within that world, there's still such an incredible depth of characters and situations you can put them in, but that they were purists to the various different companies or cities or whatever else it might
Yeah.
be. Okay.
And
Okay.
I think what actually really killed it was Wizards bought them and changed it all to be Dungeons and Dragons, and trying to get this to be the miniature game to play during your
Okay.
D&D campaign, and it just kind of killed it.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder how much that happens. I know that when Wizards of the Coast bought Dungeons and Dragons, that they did some alterations to it, and everybody who was used to it being more free form, like all I need is graph paper and the manuals. I make everything up, and even then, boy, we worked our way through all different kinds of the scenarios. Uh, especially my younger brother and his friends did an entire summer where they did a huge campaign and did like 9 of the sub campaigns that lead to this big conclusion. And I thought that was a very good balance between its goals and situations and stuff you want to find yourself in, but it was still all of the interactive. The DM still can create whatever they want within those scenarios. There was still a whole bunch of randomness and chaos and stuff like that, instead of being kind of like just set down to shoot and every
Right.
game is going to be very similar, So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So
Ice, let's see, something Rift. Ice Rift of the Frost
Yeah,
Giant
yeah.
Jarl and stuff like, I bet you I could come up with a whole bunch of those names. Anyway.
Yeah, I think they've revived that one actually. I
Okay.
know I was going through
Glacial Rift.
Glacial
That's what
Rift.
it was.
I was going through a campaign with Tiamat as the final big boss. It was this whole thing.
Yeah.
What they do now, and it's kind of cool. I mean, I remember getting the modules, thin little booklets that would be one adventure, and then you put
Yeah.
6, 7 of them together, you have the whole campaign. Well, now they just
Exactly.
release a hardback with 6 or 7 adventures all put together, and it's one book with the campaign right from the
Got
start.
it. Okay. Yeah.
So
So Tabletop Simulator must have like not really fantasy type things, but they've got classics, right? They've got the Games 100, they got Acquire, they got Monopoly, they
yeah,
got
uh,
Scrabble, that kind of stuff. Maybe not Scrabble because that's got its own world, but I don't know anything that you can simulate depending on how
right.
heavy-handed the game owners
Well,
are. You know what I mean? Like, because
yeah, a lot of this is in the gray area that you can
yeah,
get the mods and it's not
okay.
sanctioned.
Yeah. What I would hope, I've always thought this, is that so much of that is advertisement, right? If I play 100 games of Acquire virtually, there really is a desire to get together and like play the real thing with my
Right.
friends when you're sitting around a table. You're not going to get together and do the virtualized version on a computer. You're going to want to like have the tokens in your hands and stuff like that. So all those
Exactly.
sessions lead to a sale eventually and maybe lead to sales. And, one of the big things they do with games nowadays. There's the initial game, and then there's all the expansion packs.
Expansions.
There's all the add-ons. You know what I mean? So Cards Against Humanity has made what a 10, 15-year career out of
Yeah.
the black box, the whatever this is box 7A. You know what I
Right.
mean? That kind of thing.
Right.
So and I thought that they were very cool about it. It wasn't just Cards Against Humanity. It was, let's see, Crabs Adjust Humidity. It
Right.
was, you know what I mean? They started to have all these other silly box names, but they put the work into the funny phrases. And it was an homage and an addition to, it wasn't competition with, except for sales. Do you know what I mean? They weren't trying to
Right.
create a whole new gaming system. So I hope, I don't know, the Cards Against Humanity people always seem to be very, very cool about everybody that does a version of ours, it just cements our brand in the public
Yeah, exactly.
consciousness that much more that if you want to go to the sun source of where this all started, the best version, come to Cards Against Humanity, not the knockoffs.
And
You
I
know what
think
I
that's
mean?
what
So,
most people most people haven't been as happy with the knockoff third party stuff.
right.
So in general, there's not a good vibe with, hey, buy all of this. Don't worry about the real stuff. So that's
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
good for them. I know with tabletop, there's a couple card games I used to play, and there's not many people that play them anymore. So that's a good way to revive playing those. I mean, I remember I went to some guy's house in Ravenna almost 20 years ago to play this one Star Wars card game because he was the
Okay.
only guy in the area I could find that played it.
That would
Well,
have a copy of it and knew
yeah,
what to do.
yeah.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
I
Yeah.
found him through the online and like, hey, we should play. So
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
moved. He doesn't even live here anymore. And so I could play with somebody in Hawaii. So it's an old card game. I don't feel too bad if I'm going to play that on tabletop because they don't sell it anymore, you know.
Got it.
And so I do have the cards too. So it's not like I'm just doing it with this. So
Yeah. I have to share quick stories here. I think we mentioned I have often spoken on multiple topics over the course of my speaking career. I went to University of Illinois and they had the Plato educational computer system and, programmed algorithms for teaching operations or whatever else it might be, programming language. And a great book came out called like The Friendly Orange Glow that
right,
was about, it wasn't just the educational system, it was that they had plasma panels, a number of hardware breakthroughs, and it really was years, decades ahead of its time in terms of precursor to the internet, precursor to social media, all kinds of stuff. So I did a little talk about it and I showed that, some people, they kind of what you were saying, when you really love something, you kind of don't want it to fade away, even if the original creator has died. So Plato got bought by Control Data, then by, it had multiple corporate owners and they were using it for educational computer systems, but it was an odd mixture between academia and regular stuff. So it was great for, like airline simulations, training people how to be pilots and stuff, but it just didn't catch on in the corporate world to where it it took off. It got, lots of money and a firm footing. Having said that, some of the original people that worked on Play-Doh, the creators, the sysadmin, etc., they have Play-Doh running under emulation so that you can log on to Play-Doh just like it used to be. The keyboard, of course, a Play-Doh keyboard was specific with various different keys that were nowhere else. You know what I mean? The next button and stuff. But not only did I then talk about it, but I did a live demo of this is what it looked like. And yes, it really is all character based. It's, it wasn't only an 80 by 20 screen and stuff like 80 by 40. It was a plasma panel. So you had the first pixelated graphics, per pixel graphics and stuff like that. And having said that, what did I do? Man, I used to play games. Once a week, overnight, they actually had a whole system where you controlled how much people did play, because they were one of the first precursors that Play-Doh showed was people get really addicted to these things. They really were like, well, I'm going after my college degree, but I got to go play some more D&D. I got to go play some more Space Conquest.
Just 20 more hours. Just 20 more hours.
Honestly, you know what I mean? Where like I used to go to what was called the zoo. It was at the Cyril building, and people they started to have like this kind of green tan because all they saw was phosphor screens. They never went outside, and
better than gamma radiation,
like that. And so luckily they had the administrative function that said you don't do this once a week, but once a week, I would play from 10 at night until 6 in the morning. And I would, my classes weren't until 11, so I could go home and get enough sleep that I wasn't a total zombie the next day. Well, as you might imagine, I was like, I never did finish that whole Orthanc adventure. I got all the way to the 10th level, but I never killed the master monster and whatever else it might be. And I already spoke poorly. Orthanc was really just, they had all kinds of monsters, but in D&D, they had 3 different dungeons where the bottom level of 30 was like, here's the worst vampire in the world, here's the worst lich, etc. So I had to go play some more of those to kind of recapture it, you know what I mean? And even as primitive as it was, I got graph paper and I'm mapping the dungeon and I'm falling down a chute and oh my God, I went from 1st to 4th level, but I'm still a PUD level character, so I really could die if I meet a werewolf. And it really was a recapture of, no wonder I loved this. No wonder it had that sense of you get smart about what spells work against what and where things are in the dungeon. And you get like, you'll be walking along and it had it where after you've killed a whole bunch of stuff in the dungeon, it would repopulate when it got low enough. And so you might be far from safety when all of a sudden there were more monsters and your hit points gradually regenerate. But if you keep bumping into things and they all get little slashes at you, then you have to really, okay, now I got to be conservative instead of free swinging like I was a moment ago, because I got a whole bunch of stuff to wade through on the way to the staircase that's going to get me out of it. And it was wonderful, nostalgic flashback stuff, but I could also see the game elements that they put in there were so well balanced. The little caricatures of what, a dragon looked like, they looked just enough like a dragon instead of being these perfect graphics that they have now where it really is animated and wonderful. It was still, wow, this is a level 10 creature, a level 6, a level 4. And, if I can, I'm willing, of course, to go into this too much, but I really could understand how they were brilliant in the people that first put this together. And my point of pride, I guess, is some of my first coding, besides pursuing my computer science degree, was I worked on some of those things. I worked on a maze generator that, when you have either a top-down view or a 3D view where you're walking forward through the maze, it's kind of a cool programming exercise to figure out how to do that enough in real time so that it's never choppy, that it is, no matter how quick people press the keys, it kind of keeps up with them. And so it makes a little more immersive experience, even if it's only at the wireframe level.
Right.
And so I really, that's how you learn doing these things. It's not just the computer science class exercise of, okay, you run a library and figure out how to both, sort by author as well as title. No, it's like, man, the next step up is graphics integration. It's, how do you, you have a whole stats table and you're going to check it. And Play-Doh was really good about the round trip. So much in doing all the time sharing that it did, the round robining that it did, but every single user on the system, hundreds if not thousands, felt like the computer was dedicated to them. There wasn't stutter, there wasn't lag time, as they say on the end now. And just, this was like, I was there from 77 to 83, and man, they sure didn't have any of those things going on until like I said, 20 years later,
Yeah.
and there was no World of Warcraft, nowhere near it for a long time in the real world. And so hats off to all the Play-Doh people that I got to know over the course of time with how creative they were, how they kept stretching the bounds of the entire industry, of what was capable with computers. And it wasn't only to solve how are we going to do crop rotation in a way that we're going to feed the world? It was also, I got to make my dogfight simulator work so that it's really authentic.
Right,
You know
right.
what I mean? Really cool.
Well, the one thing about the game versus graphics, I will still go play old games because I can imagine it in my head, and that's what I always
Yes.
did with D&D and all that. But my kids, they'll say, "Oh, that game sucks." I'm like, "What do you mean? This is a fun game." Well, look at those graphics. Okay, wait, graphics are separate from game,
Right,
and
right.
but
The,
to them, if it doesn't have the right graphics, well, the game sucks and they don't want to play it or whatever. So
yeah.
they can play a really crappy game that it's just
It
no
looks good.
fun, but it
Yeah.
looks good, And that's why when Cyberpunk 2077 came out, people were getting so upset because it was stuttering. The graphics were breaking, but you hear other people like, "But the game is so much fun," and they're like,
Right.
"Yeah, but it sucks." So a little frustrating, but and that also reminded me, Tabletop Simulator. You can create your own stuff. It does have the ability to pull cards in, but it has a scripting language, so you can create
See,
rules and stuff.
that is absolutely a point of having an author mode, the extensibility, so people can say, man, and I mean, not only like for new things, but like just if you had house rules
Yeah,
for Monopoly and you want to be able to say, when you land on free parking, you get
right.
$500. It's like, that's
Script
nowhere
that
in the
out.
rules. Yeah. But,
And better yet, I have another program, Card Creator, that I've been
mm-hmm,
working on a couple card games. I may have
mm-hmm.
mentioned, dabbling around with some ideas and messing around. But it's really cool because you can export it to a PDF, print it out, and then you slip it into sleeves and you can actually
Yeah.
play.
Yeah.
Well, they've added to the Card Creator that it saves the files so it's compatible with Tabletop Simulator. So the other day, I literally pulled in one of the games I created into Tabletop Simulator, and I was seeing the cards, and I could send you the files, and we could load it up and play the card game I created, just to test it or whatever.
Honestly, I love that there are some people that do that they're not just trying to create the game, they're creating the environment where you can create any game.
Yeah.
And then when they release that, that I love the toolsmiths. In fact, I kind of have always been one of those. I've always liked knowing,
Right.
like, whatever I'm going through to get this done, and it's hard, if I find a way to capture 2/3 of the work, it'll encourage everybody else to use this cool
Right.
modding environment, and we'll get that many more games that I'd like to play, and just take some of the, there's a leveraging of whatever pain you've been through. Why don't you save some other people some pain? So when you're going through the wilderness, like, mark your trail so those people, Kit Carson wise, would be able to do this after you. I have
Right.
some instinct of that deep in me. Like, that's why I draw maps. When I used to be in college and people would look over at me playing my Play-Doh games and they'd see my maps and be like, man, where'd you get those? Well, I put the work in. I drew these. And I'm like, oh, can I buy you a piece of pizza? Can you take
Right.
those over to the copier? And like, so.
I have found through the years, I enjoy the creating about as much as I do playing and enjoying a game.
Yes.
I've been playing around with Python, and I found a cool book that it has it all. It brings me back to the old Commodore 64 days. So it's a hardback book, really nice looking. It talks about some of the classic games like Pong and Space Invaders, but then
Sure.
it has a listing that you can type in that is like a creation of Space Invaders or Centipede. Yes. And I'm like, wow, I get to sit here and like type this in just like it's the 80s again. But it's a great way to learn.
I used to do that.
Yeah.
Where the old Apple magazines, they actually had, like, the last third of the magazine was type all this in, and you two will have a game of Battleship or something like that. And how cool is that?
A $3 magazine. I've got 5 games. I just got to spend the next 75 hours typing. I can do that.
Yeah.
Well, actually,
floppies with the code on it. Exactly.
Yeah, it was more like 20 hours of typing and 50 hours of figuring out where you forgot the period or the comma.
That's right. Because BASIC and others were so unforgiving. forgiving.
Oh my
Exactly.
God,
Okay.
yes. So,
Oh.
speaking of, here we go again, creating and programming and all that.
Hmm.
You mentioned
Hmm.
that the whole Apple Worldwide Conference is next week, which
Right. The Worldwide Developers Conference, Apple stopped, Macworld stopped because Apple stopped going to it. That used to be the big festival where every vendor would exhibit its stuff. And that kind of thing, its time has passed. You no longer buy software in boxes.
right,
You no longer
which
the internet has changed everything. But I really used to love that,
oh yeah,
3-4 day immersion of I can walk down the aisles and get a whole the zeitgeist of what's going on, in the Apple world, the Macintosh world, it was fantastic. And you meet all the people, you meet all the
yeah,
programmers and the salespeople and everybody that's behind these various different things. And I would cover it for Mac Chicago and Digital Chicago. So then I had like press access to various different things, and that was cool because you actually did interviews and you got to like talk to Bill Niffenegger, who was one of the best digital artists, and Kai Kraus, who developed the software that nowadays you see everywhere about how to make a simulated tree that really looks like a tree. He figured
Bob
out that
Ross.
fractal element, like that, exactly. And I guess, yeah, you could do it more quickly. But so having said that, the Worldwide Developer Conference is where Apple does a lot of its product announcements now. It talks about its latest OSs. And as you know, there's Mac OS and Watch OS and iOS for iPhones and TV OS. So they go through, here's the latest things. It's been a year, so a lot of cool stuff is coming in the next version. So I love that. And they often do then also hardware announcements because, the Apple has always had very good kind of linkage between the hardware and the software, that it exploits their own stuff very, very well. And so when they announced the M1 Max last year, I was champing at the bit to get one, and I finally got one in December. Usually it's in May or June is the Worldwide Developer Conference. Almost always June, actually. But 6 months later, they actually had Apple Silicon rolling out. They had the new Macs, and it was like, man, this really is 30% faster. It's the fastest personal computer you can buy. I want the fastest personal computer that you can buy, and for reasonable money. One of the also the joys of PCs, as we often talk about, is, man, the amount of power that you get for the amount of money that you spend is just unlike anything else in the world. And it keeps getting better, and prices keep coming down. So we're just on this wonderful, forever riding this wave of
Yeah.
innovation in the computer world. So having said that, the Worldwide Developer Conference is cool because they have like the keynotes, is always the big reveal at a high level. And then they have hundreds of breakout sessions for if you're going to be doing AI work, if you're going to be doing game work, if you're going to be doing, corporate crypto work and whatever else it might be. And I spend that week with my full immersion. There's any number of, kind of like going to any number of other conferences. Wow. In this hour, there's 4 sessions that I want to go to. Well, thank God they're recording them. They're making them all available
Nice.
so that, and so it isn't only that week. I end up often staying up late at night and like, I'll in my mind go, okay, today I'm in database mode. Let's see what they're doing. And database is no longer the way to look at it. Data has become its own world of, it's not databases. It's now, the world of freeform data, the world of rich media. And how do you make it so that that's a controllable thing in the world of, I need to have a picture database, and you got to have keywords associated with, but then can you automate that? So like, we think this is enough of a bridge that we're going to call it bridge. And then the more you get people to identify it as a bridge, you get those guesses verified. And so it's not only the actuality of it, it's all the cool cutting edge things they're continually doing. And man, there's nothing like seeing smart people strutting their sassy stuff and doing breakthrough level. We're gonna do the best fitness app out there because we're gonna have motion capture. We're gonna teach you how to be a better golfer because they'll be able to correct your swing
Oh
like by
yeah,
having your
that's
iPhone look
way
at you.
cool.
Oh man, how come with an iPhone? This little handheld is got all this computing power of what took us to the moon 40
Right.
years ago and stuff, and that they find all these ways to apply it to, we're going to teach you languages, we're going to do all the right things for handy capable people, so that no matter where you've got sight or sound or other things, they found ways to compensate for that. And everything about health. There's a big health initiative. And so me was like, well, what can I do about my being pre-diabetic? What can I do about I'm an older guy? How about, I had atrial fibrillation. Now my watch can check to see if I'm going into like a weird
Right.
heart stutter. Man, It's just, it's magic. It's that
As soon
technology
as
indistinguishable from magic. It's
I know it's
wonderful.
been talked about, but as soon as the Apple Watch or the Fitbit can actually check your blood sugar, I'm upgrading my watch. I need a new one. This
Yes,
one only lasts like a day and a half on the battery,
on
so
the charge. Okay.
uh, but I know it's been talked about that they've been talking about being able to check the blood glucose, and I'm like, I don't want to be paranoid, but if I can check, the oxygen level and my heart rate and my blood pressure and my
Right.
blood sugar, I mean, those
Right.
are all the big
In
ones.
Absolutely, and easily in real time,
Yeah.
it's coming. You know what I mean? Instead of having to do finger sticks and stuff like
Uh,
that, so it'll be really nice. One of the things I noticed about, like, I have always loved going to things where I put all the rest of the world aside, and what I'm here to do is learn for 4 days. My mind
yeah.
just loves kind of just jumping into the deep end of the pool and absorbing all that I can and all that kind of stuff. So, I'm not even in the fields of like. I'm not a big graphic artist. We always laugh about. I can do like stick figures. I don't have anywhere near the feel for how to capture something in
Yeah.
color and motion and all that kind of stuff. And yet, I love going to see those things demonstrated because it's just so cool that they really found a way to make um, Pixar level things. That looks like human hair. It moves with the wind like human hair. Well, maybe not applying to me, but you know what I'm trying to say.
And
And
that's a really great example of not just an artist doing that, but you have a tech programmer, because they took both. It wasn't
right,
just somebody drawing cell by cell or close to it like the old Bugs Bunny. It's
that's right.
here's the graphic, but we want it to be populate and we want to move, and so you got a programmer. But along with that, they probably had to talk to medical people or biologists, or I mean, there's multiple fields that they probably
That's exactly right. They will go into that. They'll talk about, in order to get this, like, they call it the uncanny valley,
yeah.
right? Where the more you try to simulate a human being, the closer you get without being just right, it's more unnerving to people because then it looks kind of ghoulish. It looks kind of unnatural. And it's more off putting than if you just did a caricature and let it be a puppet, let it be a
Right.
cartoon, that kind of thing. Well, in order to cross that uncanny valley, what do you have to do? You have to learn everything about how a human body works, about how the skin has layers and that light penetrates differently in the layers. And so if you're trying to get light falling on a human being, you can't have it look like a zombie. It has to be that the translucency
Right.
is correct. How do eyes reflect? How do they move? How do they track? That it all has to be like a human being would do it. And so you have to learn all those amazing skeletal mechanics and how muscles work and how hair moves and just that when a person exhales, they don't just exhale from their mouth, their whole body is involved. and,
Right.
and it's just the coolest thing to see how um, they talk about that, the physics models that are behind. This guy just went surfing, and in order to do that, you had to learn all about water and how water interacts with a surfboard and water interacts with itself. And the greater that you get the number of water particles interacting in a real way, the more it looks real. But the computational load just explodes. So you end up having server farms that are going to do every single frame of an animation that's
Right.
going to show Tarzan swinging through the jungle. If all those leaves are moving and all those vines are stretching, there's an amazing amount they have to do when you
And
make it real. You know
and
what
I
I mean?
love,
So
and we've talked about this before, like people's psychology and
Mhm.
the marketing manipulating people because of how they think in that. The same with some of the
Mhm.
graphics. I've heard a few things and they like, look, if we went detailed down to the hair and made it would look weird, but we can make people think it looks like a million strands of hair if we did this, this, and this. And they come close. That fools us into thinking it's more than it is sometimes.
Absolutely. There is an entire science that's based on persistence of vision and what human beings take in. Like when they
Right.
talk about first the retina display, that it really had the same resolution as your eye, and that you don't need to go deeper than that. But in a lot of ways, you can also back off from that because compression algorithms are based on what's the way that we can impart enough information so that we give it the persistence of vision, the benefit of the doubt, if you will, that
Right.
it isn't jarringly wrong. There's no, my eyes don't work smoothly. They saccade. They jump in little passages. And so as long as you can get in sync with that, like 20 frames per second or whatever it is for various different video games, you don't need to go anymore with the moss doesn't have to be more perfect on the wall of this dungeon while you're fighting a creature in the dungeon than this many pixels because you're too busy worrying about the monster and fending off his attack.
Right.
You're not looking around and going, wow, that light source isn't exactly reflect. You know what I mean? So
Right.
they're very, very smart. They've had to be in terms of efficiency and bringing a game to market, the amount of time that it would take to do all of those. This needs to be really fine in its, and this can be coarse because there's trade-offs in all of those
Right.
various different things you're doing. And I love learning that kind of stuff, that there really are decisions behind it. And that like when they show, well, here's where we did it here. It's like, you're right. That looks just fine. You know what I mean? that this is 60 times the computational intensity because like while you're walking down the street, what's a human being doing? They're looking at new. They're not looking at each individual leaf on a tree, but
Right.
if the tree moves wrong, they'll notice it. That looks like a robot tree. You know what I mean?
Robot tree.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that you were doing something you don't normally do and upgrading to an M2 already. Uh,
So that's what I alluded to earlier of going to the Worldwide Developer Conference last year and hearing about the M1 and just starting to drool and pant from that. They're going to. So I've heard it called both the M1X and the M2. That is the next generation of Apple Silicon. They've gotten away from the Intel standard, and that it's got this many more cores and this many more dedicated on the chip type things. It's got just I think something incredible like 32 billion transistors on a chip or
Jesus.
something, and that I have no idea in context what that means compared to what is the original
Right.
8080.
It's
Did
beyond
it have?
normal
Oh, that had
comprehension.
six strands, that kind of. But I know that when they show what it can do, that you really can have like especially rich media. So much of the world now is how do you capture photos and then do anything you want to them? How do you have a camera that's good enough so you capture a great photo in the first place so that it's in and music, same thing. They've always had compression algorithms, but now we're getting to if you can do near lossless music in real time, that's been the grail all along. Your file size stops mattering, transmission speed and time stops mattering, and so, but there's still something to be gained from. We want to understand music so thoroughly that we can recreate it beautifully, no matter it tunes itself to what speakers you have, what monitor you might have, that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of, I know they're going to talk about, well, here's the next one. Like, for instance, one of the things I had to do when I got the M1 was I stepped back in memory. I always max the memory out of my system because that's the cheapest way to get a lot more power
Right.
for multiple apps and that kind of stuff. And I think I had, 32 in my previous Mac Mini and that gig, and now I had to go back to 8. That's what came kind of on the board with the new M1. Well, as you might imagine, all of the Mac artists were like, this just isn't enough. We need to, and so now it's going to be like 8 or 16 or 32. And so for the new speed and the new amount of memory and the new better SSD, and I'm going to be able to get another one of these for like $1,200, $1,500 tricked out. That just seems like it's money. It's real money. $1,500 is not to be sneezed at, and yet I can take that huge step forward. I
Right.
I really am. I've usually not the guy that goes with state of the art because as we kind of talked about a couple times, while I've been using my M1, I've had crashes that are very uncharacteristic of the Mac, and it's irritating. You're in the
Yeah.
middle of three different things going on, and then something seizes up and so they've cured that with OS releases over the course of these last December to now 6 months. But am I going to step onto that painful treadmill once again when I get my new M2? That they're going to have to work
Right.
out the bugs, no matter what they've been able to figure out in the labs. When you get into the real world and what crazy stuff Al has going on in his machine, so. And emulation, I use Parallels to do Windows emulation. Well, luckily, Microsoft came out with a Windows emulation that would work on the M2 because emulation is really based a lot on the underlying hardware. And so things have been stuttery occasionally there. And, so not only am I doing my browser testing of various different things, but like, hey, if I want to play Civilization and Civilization seizes up, oh, God, I forgot to do a save. I've just lost 45 minutes of play. That's
Right.
that's
That's
real
whole
money,
eons of empire building.
Exactly. And so And so they're going to announce it, and I'm going to learn all about it, and I know
Nice.
I'm going to be terribly tempted. But then that's one of those things like if I'm making any money in the market, if Colleen and I are doing well with we've been frugal because of COVID, that sure seems like a reasonable place to put $1,500. And then, like I laughed about, I'll turn this one into a server, so I'm still
Right.
experimenting with the old one, and I kind of like my Mac Mini before this. It really is such a workhorse that I kind of don't want to put him out to pasture, to stay with the horse analogy.
Right.
I just kind of want to let this perfect thing keep running. And yet there's something I always like being enough on the cutting edge that when people ask me about things, oh yeah, I bumped into that. And what you have to do is, make sure you get the latest version of Tech Tool Pro, because it's the one that's updated for everything about SSDs, and it will handle all your disk problems. Whereas the previous one, it only handles like the volume tables. It doesn't handle all of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I like being that I don't, I'll get this. Boy, this is kind of, it's funny how this sometimes ties together. I like being the guy that when they figured it out, I'm happy to share with others so that we can leverage my pain into other people not having to go through it as well. And so that's kind of why I've always tried to be relatively current with my technology, is that when people ask me, you know, do you have any experience with this Mac? Like the Mac Mini is cool because you attach existing components to it. You don't have to upgrade your entire system and spend $3,000 instead. Well, sometimes it might be glitchy. Yeah, the USB C/3 is slightly different, so you might not be able to attach your existing keyboard and mouse unless you get an adapter. And so it's $29 worth of pain. It's not you have to throw it away, but
Right.
now you got a little more of a sea of cables hanging out the back of
Well,
your machine,
I
and
was
that's
going to
not
say,
elegant.
I remember when I got my 486. I think I
Okay.
paid about 1,000, 1,200 for it. So I mean, the prices
Yeah,
have stayed consistent, it seems. Um,
exactly.
but I remember them saying at the time, "Oh, you'll be able to upgrade this forever," and that was the big thing at the time: upgrade it forever. Well, okay, yes, you can, but once you upgrade the motherboard and the CPU and the memory and the hard drive, you just got a new machine. That's not upgrading any longer.
That's right. One of the unjoys is the Macs are quite closed in comparison. When I
Yeah,
ordered the Mac, I had to order with how I wanted. And it used to be you could actually do your own, you could add memory, you could substitute hard drives and stuff like that. Not for these new guys. It might be that they will um, retreat to it being a more open machine, because one of the things they're trying to do with these is have them be countless Mac minis on server racks that are actually running server farms. Well, those guys do want to be able to do not just buy a new raft of Mac minis, but I'm going to put some new hard drives in them, and those are only
right.
$120 instead of a new $1,000 thing. So depending on what market they're catering to, it really might be that we'll see openness again. But right now, for the first one, they so much wanted it to be a controlled environment because we're showing off our big thing, and we don't want someone to like
And
jam something that doesn't work in there and then complain about Apple.
and
You know what I mean?
yeah, it's kind of funny because it's pros and cons, the PC versus the Apple. One's
Sure.
much more open, but then everyone complains if something doesn't work or doesn't. I'm like, but
Right.
that's because you have the pro of choosing from 1,000 different video cards with 1,000 different hard drives and 10 or 20 different CPUs and different memory, and you've got 3,000 programs of anything to choose from. Well,
Exactly.
Microsoft isn't responsible for some of the bad programming. I've tried to explain this to people that if you put a bad program on there, it may crash Windows, but that doesn't mean it's Microsoft's fault. That could just be bad
Right.
programming on their part. Whereas the Apple, they've gone a different direction where they limit your choices, but they make the user experience much better. And I think that's why so many people flock towards it. I mean, if my mother wanted something else, I'd probably go to get her an Apple because she's not going to have as many choices for stuff, you know.
I, I, I really have, ever since I became a consultant and I was worried about what's the value of my time as compared to my hobbyist goofing off time. That's why I've much more embraced, in many ways, the Macintosh world, because it just works. It
Right.
really does work. It really integrates better, all that kind of stuff. And the productivity boost that it gave me and stuff like that, I welcomed. However, having said that, there really have been times when it's like, wow, I'm envious whenever I pop open PC World instead of Mac World. They really do have 50 word processors instead of
Right.
three. And all that has shifted, as we talked about, a little bit because of the browser world, but just the world of now that the Mac's been around for a long time, it's got a great ecosystem of those things. It's still not as much, anywhere near as much as the PC, but it's less wild and woolly. And so the fact that they've held people to programming standards not only for like it's if you will, the modern parallel is Android phones versus
Right.
iPhones. That there's so much more available, but there's all kinds of apps that don't work quite right, or they might actually have malicious things built in. But because the Android store doesn't check for those kinds
Right.
of things, you're kind of more easily malwared or virused or whatever else it might be. And that's not meant to be a scare tactic, but it is kind of reality when a
Right.
week doesn't go by where I don't read about. Be careful about this, folks. Make sure that your malware sniffer is upgraded constantly because there's continual attacks coming out of
And,
the
and
balls. You know what I mean?
and for some reason people don't seem to realize that on the Androids. And I get
Yeah,
emails every now and then from certain people and like, hey, I think you put an app on there that's reading through your contact list and sending stuff out. They're like, well,
right.
I haven't put anything on there, just this free flashlight app.
See
Well, there
that?
you go.
Exactly.
But
Exactly.
the other cool thing is like what we were talking earlier with Tabletop Simulator. Back in the day, if you had a Mac, you could do things with Macs and PCs were separate. But like Tabletop Simulator, if we both were running it, we could still connect and play
Runs on
against each
both.
other.
That's
And
right.
things like GOG, good old games, they have those now that when you have you been to GOG?
Oh yeah, I
Okay,
have probably
okay,
30 games bought from them
yeah,
over the course of yeah.
30. Oh, you're slacking there, Hal.
Well,
Uh,
uh,
but
I can only give myself like that late at night gaming
so
thing
much
because
time.
otherwise I'll just fall down the addiction tunnel. I
Right.
don't want to do
But
that.
the cool thing is, I can buy a game and run it on my PC, but you could buy it and run it on your Mac. And
That's
they
exactly
even have a
right.
lot of them that run on Linux now too.
Yes.
So that world is definitely, it's more about what you want to do and not so much the uh, system you have, and that's
Platform.
great.
Yeah. Over the course of time, when I mentioned earlier about Plato emulation, if you will, emulation has become such an incredible, powerful thing that most people don't realize what incredible benefit it's been to the world. It's not only being able to emulate past versions of Windows or Macintosh and so forth, it's being able to do, when you do development, that they
Yeah.
actually have figured out, here's the various different foundation classes that if you compile with this for Macintosh versus this for Windows, you get like a look-alike. You can get 98% of your project done where it absolutely is the same. And whatever those little differences are still with exact screen placement, exact font use, exact being aware of the ports on your machine and how much you can talk to them and query them to find out how to configure yourself. That's why things can come out for multi-platform so relatively quickly and not need
Right.
another half year of tuning to be able to port it to another environment. It's really amazing what they can do nowadays.
And
So
that's one area that Apple has opened up. I know 5, 8, whatever years ago, I was looking into mobile development a bit, playing around with it, never did anything
sure.
serious, but it was very difficult to create one code base and put it on Android and on Apple. And
Hmm.
at the time, you also had to think Palm and BlackBerry and you know
That's right. Right.
but now Apple's opened that up because to do that, you had to have a Mac. You had to run things on the Mac to put it up into the store. And they've opened that. So you could have a PC and have an account and put things up that'll go in the Apple store, iTunes store
Right.
for mobile. So I like that they've done that and opened the world up a little bit
Yeah.
there.
This is a very deep geek thing to talk about. One of the ways in which for
That's our
when I
next
do it,
T-shirt, Deep Geek.
deep geek. Well, when you code, you're aware that there's always new things being added. You know what I mean? And so you take advantage of, hey, this is a better way to handle sound or data or whatever else it might be. But also when you're coding to be able to handle that, I want my app to be able to be installed on every single iPhone that's still out there.
Right.
Well, there's 6 generations of technology that have been supported over the course of time. Apple has the emulators that let you take your app and run it in each of those different environments. And then when you see what breaks, you're like, oh my God, that's right. 3 versions ago, we didn't have cameras more than this resolution, or they
Right.
didn't do this. And so I can't assume that I'm going to have like everything about the hardware and the software and the power of it. And you get a real appreciation for the technological leaps and bounds that it's taken, where you say, man, that phone was only 3 years ago. and yet I can't fully, unless I change something here to like check to see what phone I have and then do a different thing. There's overhead that comes to me. I don't want the user to ever have to have something break because of that, but I have to do some work to keep up with. Some people hold onto their phones for 3 years. I do, and I, you know what I mean. It's like you really get a feel for how much we keep on advancing by sometimes having to take steps back and going, wow, that really is not a long time ago, but it's
Right.
generations of code ago, and I still have to account for it. So it gave me a real appreciation for that, man.
I know there have been a few times I've had somebody complain, well, I can't run this because Microsoft won't let me. Well, what are you trying to run? Well, that's from 95. That's why you can't run
Right?
that anymore.
It's Arkanoid. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
I mean, come on. But it's funny because I've had a few smarmy Apple people go, well, I can run stuff from way back. Apple supports it forever. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. Things change too much. And I've got
Right.
an iPad sitting here that has got a couple apps on it, but I can't put anything on it. I can't even run the old stuff on it anymore. It won't even let me. So,
Right.
and it's not disparaging towards Apple. It's part of technology, but it's the users that go, well, we're better because we can run it forever. No, it's not true. You can't run it forever.
One of the things I'll give a shout out. I love development environments where they've made the act of coding so good. I mean, if you grew up as you know, I used to, good lord, to be a geek for a minute, when you had to go on the mainframe world and look for SOC 7 errors because somebody put character data into a numeric field, you know, that's how you really had to do things bare to the metal to find out what was wrong. And in coding for that, you had to account for all that kind of stuff. Well, the minute you went into any kind of integrated development environment and it took care of, you're never going to make a variable error again. You're never going to have a memory overflow error that you can't do a garbage cleanup routine to fix it. And I could just go into so much, having been in multiple generations, when they did a big new thing, it was like, man, that's going to save me hours of not only hours of time, but hours of painful time, hours of
Right.
shite. And so when I love nowadays, when not what I just said is it isn't that you just let's try it and see what breaks. They almost always have. You can look at my existing code base. Oh, that's a command that's been deprecated in this new version. So you're going to have to, and they'll either forewarn you so you'll stop using it, or they'll tell you in your existing code base this is no longer acceptable, and they'll tell you the parameter string has changed. And so the act of getting something to move forward or to move backwards is actually not just let me give it a try. There's tons of assistance for how to know exactly what's wrong and how to fix it in like while you're typing. You know what I mean? It'll
Right.
bring up you're going to use this command and immediately comes up with like a little shadow version of here's the 7 parameters that it might take. And you don't have to, it doesn't take all 7. You don't have to leave extra commas and stuff in there, but it really is amazing how you have to have a certain computer science feel for what's going on, but you don't have to sit there with a manual open next to you on the 3 manuals open on the desktop to say exactly how is this typed and what's the difference
Yeah.
between round up, round down, and round. And it might be obvious from the thing, but like if there's some odd things about any statistics treatment where they take different numbers of parameters. And so you can't even like just get into the flow of everything works the same. No, it was very persnickety
Yeah.
as to exactly. And they've fixed a lot of that where it'll prompt you to say, and if you can do the little assisted help where it's like, oh, that's what that means. That's what it's asking for. I never feel at a loss in the Apple development environment, Xcode, and no matter what language I'm working in, no matter what, it's boy, they put a ton of work into. If you want to get a million apps on your store, you have to make it easy for a million 13-year-old
Right.
kids to
Right.
create those apps.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Man,
And a million 60-year-old guys to
to
be
get
like, well,
into
Margaret,
something new.
Margaret. Yes, it's boy, they've done brilliant things with
I,
Xcode, man. It's the
I,
coolest
I
thing.
remember you're talking about that. I mean, the pains of programming. I mean, I remember 11 go sub 271, and
Oh
then oh my
man.
gosh, something broke. Or I have to add a new line in, or just you had to
Right.
number your lines. That's okay.
And we just
No, go
go
ahead.
ahead, please. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no.
No, A little discussion was just online about somebody imparting the wisdom, a longtime programmer saying, you don't want to number your code 1 to 10, because if you got to put another
Right,
line in there, there's no such thing as 5.5. You
right,
really should number it like 100, 200, 300 so that you can put things in the middle and not have to totally renumber your code and all the hazards that go with that when it's
right.
based on going to a certain line number.
To-
So just, man.
Totally unknown to the kids nowadays. But man,
Yes,
I
exactly.
remember those days. You learn very quickly, and it's funny because I'll still do that type of thinking when I'm
Leave room for expansion.
yes, if I'm numbering something, I'll do it in the one system I do for work, we have surveys, and I put an order flag in there because it changes. Something may be near the top, but next month we want it moved down because it's no longer as
Okay.
relevant. So I can easily go in and just change the flag number. Well, I didn't number them 1, 2, 3. I numbered them 10 and 20 and 30. And
Got
it's
it.
still 30, 40-year-old thinking with that. Okay,
Exactly.
we're getting down to time, but I wanted to tell you real quick. So exciting this weekend. I mentioned that me and Gina are doing a podcast with Colin and another friend, ghost hunting and stuff. So I'll put a link in if anyone wants to go listen to it. We're approaching ghost hunting. I say ghost hunting, but really it's paranormal. Uh,
Okay.
and we're doing it in all aspects. We're not just going on ghost hunts. We're not just doing a podcast interviewing people. We're not just talking about Bigfoot or ghosts or something. Because believe me, there's people that will say, yeah, ghosts exist, but Bigfoot's not real. And the Bigfoot people will go, ghosts suck. Bigfoot's, it's like, oh, please, people. So
Right.
we got Colin, who is our researcher. We've got Ron, who's the investigator. Gina is the experiencer, and then I'm the tech guy and just general believer and interest. So we're doing this with a family focus and trying to get 4 different viewpoints on everything. So we've got episodes starting to come out. We've done one where we interviewed a guy about his book. We did another one where Gina talked about her experiences, what she's seen with hauntings and stuff. And Ron did a talk on the history of witches. And so
Interesting.
we're really trying to get a balance and do a lot. So this weekend, we are going down to Beaver Creek to Gretchen's Lock, which is supposedly haunted. And
Interesting.
the,
Okay.
the thing was, we did a whole episode down by Beaver Creek, Ohio. Um, but we did a whole episode talking about the history and where the legends came from, because we like to talk about legend and myth. And basically, what
Okay.
we uncovered was the whole legend and myth is a farce, that nothing like that ever happened at all. So
Okay.
that led into a discussion. Well, does that mean it's not haunted, or did people believing in it create it to be haunted, or what are they
Hmm.
experiencing? Is it just mental? So we like to talk about that too. So that's what this weekend. But the cool thing is I got a GoPro. So to go with it, with that, I took my old camera out, and I've been working with the Raspberry Pi. I've got a camera set up for nighttime to take pictures. So I'm going to test it out this weekend. So just
Interesting.
whole
Okay.
combination of cool stuff that we're doing with that.
That honestly, that sounds fascinating. As you know, I'm quite the skeptic, and yet if you're going to pursue it, that's what you want to do. Is so capture data. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like do like. It's not just the room felt cold. It's like, did you have a thermometer running? Did you have a camera running?
Yes.
Did you have some kind of ectoplasmic detectotron
Right.
running? Yeah, yeah. I kind of have to say, it wasn't just I got talked into it. It wasn't
Eh,
just, well, somebody made up a legend that has no basis in fact, but it sure sounded persuasive. So now
right.
I'm scared. You kind of want to be proof is proof. You know what I mean? There's a
Right.
burden of proof that
And
goes with extraordinary claims. So,
that's
all
where I
right.
keep pushing it. One of the things I really get irritated with some of the shows, they're like, okay, we're going to set a camera up here. And then they say, well, did you see that shadow move? And well, I'm not sure. And, it's just like, and I'm like, okay, well, where's your EMF detector? Where's this? They set up one device at a time. And I'm like, no, if you set up 5 or 6 things, it's like, well, look, at this time stamped time, the temperature did drop 5 degrees. And we
And it
thought we saw
matched
something
the
move,
flicker.
and
Exactly.
the
That
lights
there we
went
go.
off, and this other camera over here also caught something moving. They never catch something on more than one camera.
See,
So
You would think that would be key. In other words, if you're going to have something that like there's a flicker in the fabric of reality, yeah, multiple cameras would all catch that.
yes,
It's not going to be,
yes.
oh yeah.
Because you always get people that are skeptics going, well, that's just a bug on the camera lens. Well, it could be. If I had a second camera set up, it would help determine that. And what we've
Redundancy. Yes,
yes, and
yes.
what we've pretty much determined is like, look, if we don't want to. Here's the other thing I had is any data we get or any video, any pictures, we're going to put on the website in the raw form and complete. So if I have
And
5
let
hours of
people
video,
pick at it. Exactly. Yes, yes.
we don't want to say, hey, go to 2 hours, 11 minutes, and 43 seconds. Did you see something that, because then people are going, oh, yeah, I saw something. We're just going
Right.
to put it up and see if people make comments. And if we get 4 or 5 people all saying, hey, I saw something at 2 hours and 11 minutes. Well, okay, more
That's
people
another
saw
kind
something.
of verification. Exactly.
Yes.
The plural of anecdote is not data, but putting out the actual capture is going to be something that you get multiple people not knowing when they should be looking, but what they should be looking for. If there's then a kind of a correspondence of perception, that would be an interesting way to say, well, maybe there's something worth investigating. Okay.
Right. So anyway,
Very
just
cool.
to share,
All right.
I'll put links
Have
in.
fun with that. That'll be cool.
And we're going camping. So, I mean, we get all sorts of great fun out of it because we love to camp.
Yeah. Beaver Creek is a wonderful area. The Weiss Ward faction used to live down there. I always like going to Yellow Springs. It's a cool, funky artist town down there. You know what I mean? It's very friendly with bikes. It's got all kinds of like art stores and donut stores and whatever else, healthy food. So that's a very interesting little oasis in the middle of otherwise kind of like, bad radio Ohio, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yellow Springs has a really great bookstore. I think it's a Dark Star, it's called. And they have some stuff in their sci-fi section that I've not seen anywhere else.
I love dedicated stores like that. There used to be a place called The Stars Our Destination in Chicago that I make a pilgrimage once a year and just aisle by aisle, shelf by shelf, go through and like, here's a British import I've never seen before. Here's like, I love places that try to be complete. And if you talk to people like, what are you reading lately? That starts like a 30-minute, because they really know their stuff, like we do.
Yeah. And the one, this was before, but the one Star Wars comic I didn't have, they did have there at the one time. So
wonderful.
I remember that when I saw that. So that's always good. Yeah. And they have a cat that roams the store. So, it's for everybody.
Exactly.
All
Very
right.
good.
All right,
okay. We got always a pleasure. We'll, let's see, next time, I don't know, we always have the list and we'll catch up on the list next time.
Yes.
We did have a fun time on Friday night. It's kind of funny. I'm always curious. We try to make it interactive, but most of the time it's us talking anyway because we have a lot to say. Yeah. And sometimes it's people that they digress. Sometimes even more than we do. And then there's a little bit of crowd wrangling to be like, if it was physical, then I could be like, okay, let's get back on topic. But I don't want to be cut offy when we're doing something in a Zoom environment. It's a dilemma in a little ways. You know what I mean?
And not all of us have fiber like you. So you get too many people with low bandwidth, it starts cutting into everything.
Yeah, kind of stuttery and okay.
Yeah.
All right. Have fun with it. We have 11 o'clock appointments. Here we go. All right.
Here we go. We're off.
Take care, Stephen. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Relentless Geekery Podcast. Come back next week and join Alan and Stephen's conversation on geek topics of the week.